excited for tonight's conversation around the concept of freedom from fear. Y'all, it is wild the type of paralysis that we can experience when we really are living in fear, when we are consumed by the worries or the concerns of what people are thinking about us, what are they thinking? It was interesting. I was talking with a counselor, and she challenged me a couple years ago that my desire to know what someone was thinking, or even my desire to know how someone was doing, how much of that was actually predicated in fear because I wanted to know. And so it was fear manifesting as kind of control, but the way that it actually was being interpreted by both me and the other person was actually through this real curious and even empathetic desire. And so that really forced me to kind of go to take a pause and to really go inward and examine my innate questioning of wondering how someone was doing, how somebody was thinking, specifically in moments where perhaps there was maybe more opportunity for conflict. And what that revealed to me in those moments was how much I really had fear in the driver's seat when it came to my desire to become emotionally intelligent. And that was a very humbling experience. I grew up the majority of my life, both in childhood and growing up into adulthood. In your 20s, you're still very much so growing up. So, for the majority of my life, I had lived very unaware of myself and very unaware of even having context for emotional health and emotional intelligence. And so, it was only in my late 20s that I really started becoming aware of this concept. And so, the definition of emotional intelligence is the ability to be aware of, understand, control, and convey one's own emotions, and the ability to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and with empathy. And what was so interesting is that for the majority of my life, I had actually been, I don't know how much of it was I was taught versus I just learned by way of I learned how to thrive in my own kind of environment. And I think sometimes it's both. Sometimes it is you're taught something and you just by proxy of whatever encounters you're having in your life, you start experiencing these things and then you learn them that way. And so growing up, I learned that by way of allowing for myself to sit in someone else's shoes through and by way of empathy, by way of just engaging with other people and learning how to see the world through their perspective, that actually really, man, that brought friendship, that brought a feeling of intimacy with people because I would sit in their experience and they would open up and then they would feel loved. And so I learned connection by way of this ability of empathy. But because empathy was coming on the heels of, and I guess you could even say I'm going to actually rewire this framing here because empathy was coming before emotional intelligence, that first half of the definition, because I really had no semblance of self, because I had no connection with who I was. Me showing empathy, actually, it was kind of motivated by fear in and of itself. I was afraid that if I didn't have an ability or a pathway to connect with somebody, would I be loved? Would I have the very thing that we all crave since, we need that coming out of our mother's womb. We need connection. We need food. We need love. Like there was a Stanford study that was done that was so fascinating. It was a mother and her baby, and the baby was nursing. And the mother is cooing at the baby and smiling and just having this really meaningful connection. The baby's nursing and looking at the mother. And then the mother in the experiment, she stops. She doesn't make a face or do anything negative to the baby, but she just completely changes her demeanor. One from, that of being loving and adoring and affectionate to just kind of being neutral. And immediately the child stopped nursing, got agitated, and was trying to make eye contact with the mother. The moment the mother resumed the cooing and the just tenderness towards the child resumed its nursing. So it was wild to see, and this was the finding and the result of the study, was that as a way of the child feeling securely loved and the affectionate of the mother in terms of an emotional level, they were thus able to resume meeting a critical human need for survival, which was eating. Eating, just simply the food and nourishment to sustain their life source. So it's fascinating because we so often think of love, acceptance, belonging, those beautiful, meaningful terms, but something as a non-necessity. When in reality, that is the very thing that is so essential for our ability to live a whole, healthy, vibrant life, to the point that little babies would stop feeding and nursing in order to find love and connection. And, we see this on the opposite end of the spectrum where you hear of people dying of broken hearts. It's wild to see how much people are so intertwined with their beloved. And so there's this element as we kind of look at the landscape of, okay, what does it look like for healthy, whole, functioning human beings? What does it look like for me to exist in a healthy environment where I'm not codependent, where I'm not literally dependent on how they think of me, what their emotional thermostat is, that then I kind of temper mine off of. And then also going to the opposite extreme where, okay, I'm not codependent, but I'm not completely living on my own. I'm not living in isolation because community is so important. So, what is the middle ground? And, we kind of find like codependentness on one end, and then the egotistical, narcissistic way of being in terms of thinking that you're the best and you don't need anybody. Both of those are kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. So, what does it look like to exist in that middle ground? To realize, man, community is so important. And the reason why I bring up community as it pertains to this concept of can you really be free from fear is because so much of our fear has to do with the people around us, has to do with what could happen if, what if I fail, what if I don't belong, what if I am rejected. And man, most of my fears, I don't know about you, but most of my fears are actually residing in the underlying concern or insecurity over my own identity as it pertains to the world around me. It's funny. I've heard more and more people. I've experienced this for myself, and I'm hearing more and more from others who have felt the same way. It's like I'm good alone. When I'm alone with myself, I like who I am. I like what I watch. I like what I listen to. I like what I consume. I like me time. But more and more of us are really experiencing disconnection when we're in groups. It's almost like we've lost the ability to connect, whether it's in person or just online. We're resorting to these AI bots for companionship. And at the end of the day, we're not really ever taught, if you think about it, we're not really ever taught how to do relationships. So, when it comes to this question around how do we become free from fear? Is it possible? It's so important that we actually do the work to understand, well, what am I afraid of to begin with? And so, as we continue our conversation tonight, I just want to jump here in the chat. Jaja, it's good to see you. I'm glad you're here. Matsus, where are you from? I actually grew up in Maryland in the States. So I'd love to know where you're from. Faltura, hello. Thanks for joining. David, good to see you. Lego, last. Thank you for joining. Prince. Y'all, I would love to know, as we're talking around this concept of fear, I would love to know when you think about fear and what you've been afraid of in the past. If you're willing, I'd love to hear what is the thing that has in the past prevented you from living in freedom. Because really on the other side of freedom lies it's like, okay, well, what's the antithesis of freedom? And it's funny, I've never thought of it in this way, but I really think that it's fear in so many ways. Freedom versus fear, it's like this constant battle against the two of them. And my gosh, how often are we really not allowing ourselves to walk in the freedom of our own potential or of our own identity or of even just joy, the freedom of joy. Y'all, joy requires and is predicated on freedom from fear of what people are going to think about us. We cannot exist in the purity of joy if we are wondering what is going on. Like, it's almost like to the right and to the left rather than looking straight ahead, rather than the clarity of this is where I'm going. This is how I'm going to get there. This is who I'm going to be going there with. If we're in fear, we cannot help but look laterally and horizontally rather than existing in the freedom that is, I know where I'm going. I've got my North Star. I'm vertically aligned. There's this concept of vertical alignment that kind of came to me, I guess you could say, a couple years ago. And if you go to, well, I don't normally share this, but if you visit verticalalignment.com, I created a whole just 21 days list of emails that I created last year, actually for my birthday. It was a little bit of a birthday present, I guess you could say. And I did that because I host knowing retreats. And the majority of people who attend these retreats say, they wish that they had some way to kind of keep doing the work. So I created 21 days of alignments, and it really helped me, and it's helped a number of people who have participated in it, because it's about the process of, on the Knowing Show, we talk about our intellectual and emotional and physical and spiritual intelligences. It's about how do I engage every part of me as an individual to show up and live a whole, full functioning, holistic life that is one of freedom rather than just being trapped by fear. So, to this question of, am I living vertically aligned? Do I know who I want to be? Do I know where I'm going? And do I know who I am? Versus I'm fixating on the right and on the left. And effectively, like that compass is pointing east and west rather than north. So, just jumping back here in the chat, Christopher Adams says, what it means to be dismayed is a sudden loss of courage due to intense phobia in the midst of circumstances. Wow, just as God said to both Joshua and Isaiah, we are encouraged to travel forth regardless, or tread forth regardless. Wow, to be dismayed is a sudden loss of courage. Wow. That's so good. Percocet, hello. It's good to see you. I went to Austin a couple weeks ago, or Houston, I'm sorry, for the World Cup. And man, it was so hot and sticky, but I'm up on the northeast side visiting my family, and it's been terrible weather here. Although I've been hearing that it's been worse weather because of the ash like floating down from the fires in Canada. So any Canadians here, just thinking about you guys. I know it's just been terrible. Paris, hello. Thank you for joining. Happy Dog Bellies. AI is not better than people. People have no idea what's coming with AI. When 80% of unemployment, you won't think AI is so great. And it's coming like a tidal wave. So if you guys are interested, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on this, if you guys are interested, I'd love to bring on some folks to talk about AI and kind of what's going on there. It is absolutely insane. And a lot of the numbers of unemployment today aren't accurate. Like, they're not reporting on a lot of what's actually going on kind of behind the scenes. Abdo, I'm from Maryland in the States. Lego, I'm a developer. Oh, nice. AI is a good friend. I love that. AI has helped me tremendously in terms of business and strategy and all of that. And it has a place 100%. At the same time, man, wouldn't it behoove us to learn how to have real conversations with our children, with our partners, with God, with ourselves? Guys, think about that. Do we actually know how to engage with our own thoughts? Do we actually know how to go into the deep end and ask the hard questions and really battle out in our own minds our former belief systems and consider, is this actually what I think? Is this actually the is this actually this here in my mind, this I'm here in my soul? Is this body and being a safe place in which to engage with the hard questions in life, or am I actually not a safe place? Because usually the extent to which we trust ourselves lends to our ability to trust other people. So if we don't have a relationship with ourselves, we are actually fundamentally going to live afraid of other people and the potential and power that they might hold over us. So if we want to kind of repair and rebuild trust with others, it comes from us actually doing that with ourselves first. And I had to do this for a couple of years. It took me a good couple of years to kind of regain trust that had been lost. And that trust lost looked like years upon years of ignoring my own, almost like intuition. I just had a sense that something was wrong and I didn't listen. I didn't do anything about it. And then slowly over time, our own internal trust erodes. And so I faced that, encountered that kind of like in the most, I guess you could say, kind of direct way, because it felt like I had betrayed myself. It was like I had abandoned my own soul and my own spirit and my own guiding system. So when we're talking about vertical alignment, sometimes it's actually a reclamation of what's been lost and healing what's been lost so that we can start living accordingly in a really beautiful way and trust and regain that relationship with self. And then that's when we can go into relationships and, man, have really, really meaningful connections with people. But to rebuild that sense of intuition, one of the things that was really helpful for me in terms of rebuilding that internal relationship with myself, I employed kind of 3 tactics, 3 steps, I guess you could say. It was first, I slowed down all the way. I slowed down whenever I felt something inside of me where my stomach felt a little like, how you can get queasy in the stomach and you're like, oh, this is weird. I don't know what's going on, but something's off. So I would get queasy in the stomach, or like my heart would race. And so I had ignored all of that for the majority of my life. And what I realized was actually that's a sign. That physical sensation is a sign to me that intuition is talking. And it's time for me to slow down. So that was number 1, slow down, lean in. Like, what's that physical sensation in my body? Where does it live? What is it saying to me? And just listening. So number 1 was slowing down. Number 2 was leaning in. And number 3 was just asking why. Why do I have that physical sensation? And a lot of times what I learned through that kind of 3-step practice, I guess, I learned that so much of what's coming up for me here in the present moment actually has roots in the past. My fear or anxiety or pain or confusion right here in this present moment actually speaks to something that happened usually many, many years ago that I just never dealt with, that I never addressed, that was usually a formative belief about me that's showing up in a behavior now, or a formative belief about somebody else that I'm now getting activated. It's interesting, when we get activated or triggered, it's so easy to point the finger. But man, that had to be inside of us in order for us to then get triggered. RK, thank you for joining. It's good to see you. He says, Proverbs 3, verse 5-6, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not on thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. RK, it's so interesting because that was a real formative belief for me that actually kind of got me into a lot of trouble. And I want to go down this path for a minute. So bear with me while I've actually never kind of publicly shared this. So bear with me while I figure out how to do that. I grew up with that verse in mind, and also another verse, because I grew up in a very Christian evangelical family. And the other verse was, your heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And so I had these verses in my head from how I was raised, where effectively, don't trust yourself. You're evil. And because of that, I personally experienced being in a relationship for 8.5 years where I knew something was really wrong, but I didn't honor or listen to what the warning signs were. Like, literally, physically, internally, I knew that something was wrong. And I knew that that person didn't love me. And I knew that if they did, they wouldn't treat me the way that they did. And I knew that the way that they treated me wasn't good. But because of how it was raised, this is why our internal narratives and the belief systems are so important for us to analyze, because they're going to directly impact our behavior, the way we treat other people, the way we treat ourselves. So I had these core beliefs that I am evil, I'm not to be trusted, I am to just simply listen to other people. And also, I had a fundamental belief that a man had a greater ability to hear from God, know God, and women couldn't. And, women very close to me had told me, well, and again, this is in accordance with the evangelical belief system. If a woman was deceived by eating the apple, she's going to get deceived again. So I had a very, I guess, disconnected relationship with myself. And as I was in a relationship with a man for, I was with him for 8.5 years, and I just knew 2 weeks in, I knew that 2 weeks after we were married, I knew that something was wrong. And turns out, 5 years in, he said that he was mad at God that we got married. So I was like, oh, I was right. Something has been wrong. And then years progress, and finally he ends up leaving. But y'all, I knew something was wrong, and I did not listen. So this is the thing that's so interesting, is that, man, if we are connected to and listening to and abiding in the presence of God, and I believe this entirely, if we are abiding in the presence of God, God speaks to us, God speaks through us. And so there's just this really, really critical, honor that we need to afford that element of our spirit, to keep our spirit pure, to keep our spirit awake and alert and listening, so that we can know how to live and where to go, and acknowledging, here's what's so interesting. It's that in all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. So it's not this concept of just sit on your laurels, don't do anything because you're wicked, but instead it's, okay, well, I'm actually going to recognize that I was created in the image of God. I actually look like God. I actually have his DNA in me. So therefore, I'm actually going to return to who I was created to be before the beginning of time, before anybody else told me who to be. And I'm actually going to return to the origin design of my creator for who I was created to be in the first place, and live according to that in my nature, versus the nurture of everybody telling me how corrupt we are, and where we go wrong, and telling us effectively who we aren't. So it's going back and saying, God, you tell me who I am. What's my identity? Identity is one of the biggest things that's attacked. So if we are to remember and kind of reclaim our identity, and there is a lot of power that's going to come with that. And I do believe at my core, because I've experienced it and I've witnessed it, that when we are walking in the truth of our identity, when we've been reminded of it and we reclaim it, man, there is power along with it. And there's a mission for each and every single one of us. Not any one of us listening here has been created without a purpose. Not any one of us here doesn't look in some way like their father. A child resembles their father. Same with the created, they resemble the creator. And so in what way do you uniquely look like, sound like, act like the splinter of God that is so unique, that nobody else has, that is yours to give to the world? And so in the reclamation of our nature and of the truth of our identity, perhaps is the reclamation of that piece of God that we get to represent, that otherwise we would have never known otherwise. Just jumping here into the chat. A.T. Malborn, hello. I'm glad to see you. Jackson Robin, good to see you. The Deadeye, I'm glad you're here. Coco, good to see you. Desert Gem, thanks for joining, TJ. I hope you have a good weekend. I love that it's Saturday. Angels, hello. Perry Guinness, Hello, my friend. G Watt, Warrior. Fiaz, good to see you. Was. Hello. Mr. Brian, hi. I'm so glad you're here. Mr. Christopher Adams. Your line of thought changes. I love that. 18 Mawborn. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's so devastating. He says, I got cheated on twice. Do you know how that feels? That's why I don't trust easily. I can't imagine getting cheated on twice. I feel like it's so damning. It really does break confidence in so many ways. I will say, man, I think I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. So you tell me if this holds any resonance for you. But for me, I really needed to reclaim that relationship with my own self. Like, because I had indicators something was wrong and I ignored it for 8.5 years. I knew something was wrong and I didn't do anything about it. And so I wonder, as we're kind of looking back on the past where it's, oh, look what happened again. And it's like, man, this is so devastating. Were there signs? How can we learn? How can we grow? How do we safeguard ourselves? We talked about this last night between how do we have self-defense out of wisdom, but not get to the point of attacking other people out of fear. So what does it look like to exist in wisdom, even when we've been so hurt? And what's interesting, the definition of emotional intelligence is kind of making a callback to how we started out this show. It's to be aware of, understand, control, and convey our own emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and with empathy. So I'm thinking about this whole conversation around, okay, how do we kind of rebuild with other people? Man, it starts with us. Do we have the ability to trust ourselves and then be able to engage with empathy and then be able to engage with wisdom? Perhaps it is actually that wisdom follows on the heels of that reclamation of our own identity. The wisdom of engaging with other people, the wisdom of being able to see and sense and just know something's off. And also, I gotta say, man, in terms of that relationship with ourselves and the reclamation of that, it's with each one of these intelligences, the intellectual intelligence, emotional, physical, spiritual intelligence. My physical body alerts me when there's something off. My stomach gets queasy. That's usually actually how my body lets me know something's wrong. Pause. My chest tightens. Something's wrong. Pause. And then it's the three practices: slow down, lean in, and ask why. What is going on? Because guys, this ability to have some kind of process of what do I do when I sense something is wrong, man, that can be one of the best ways to start regaining and reestablishing trust and relationship with ourselves when we've really severed it, when our relationship with ourselves has been broken. It's really hard to reclaim. But if we've got a practice in place of when I sense something is wrong, I am not going to self-abandon and I'm going to slow down. I'm going to lean in. I'm going to ask why, for the sake of truth, for the sake of wisdom, for the sake of my own self-preservation. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's for the sake of moving from fear into love. Just jumping back here in the chat. Oh, I love this. Perry says, always look on the bright side of life. That's so good. Pavlos, hello. Isabella, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for joining. Wow. BF says, your tears aren't weakness. They're crystals of strength. What a beautiful phrase. Crystals of strength. I love that. Wow. 18 Mawborn, we're together for 1 year and 6 months. Wow. I am so sorry to hear that. That is so sad. And, I'm hopeful. I really hope that at some point, you find somebody who will honor you, who will cherish who you are. So maybe actually it's starting with we have to first cherish who we are in order to then hopefully attract someone who feels that same way about us. Husamak Mazak. Hello, I'm glad to see you. What's the biggest life lesson you had in the last 5 years? That's a hard question. I'd actually love to post this to the chat. I'm going to go ahead and show this. Y'all, can everybody take a few minutes to answer this? What is the biggest life lesson you had in the last 5 years? This is such a good question. Oh, wow. BF says you are the primary anchor of all the relationships you have. Wow. That's so good. You change, but you are also the core of everything. Being vulnerable, I will say there are times in my life where fear is synonymous to hopelessness. Feeling defeated was a result of a lack of trust in the one who gives me strength. Oh, I love that. I'm so grateful for you sharing that, Christopher. Thank you so much. What you just said, y'all, what Christopher just shared is such an important reminder. When we are in fear, when we're feeling defeated, what is that the result of? What is this feeling? What is this emotion? What is this belief? Or what is this? Oh, this is better. What does this behavior say about the belief that I hold? So, what is the core belief that's driving the behavior of hopelessness or depression, even? And so, the more we're willing to get honest and actually, again, with that whole question of, well, asking why, slow down, lean in, ask why. Asking why means going to the root, going to the source, the origin story of what did I believe that really formed what experience, what happened that formed a belief that has led to this behavior. That's kind of the yellow brick road that we go through. Lean, good to see you. Pavlos, your inner critic is louder than your inner knowing. That voice that says, "Are you sure?" is just trying to protect you, but often it oversteps. Word. And that trying to protect you, it's so much of our physical, so much of our like gut, quote unquote, gut reaction. Or I guess I'm not trying to say gut reaction in terms of intuition. I'm saying like our autopilot, our default response actually is the desire on a very almost like lizard brain type of level of just to keep our lives comfortable and as safe as possible. Our lizard brain, our reptilian brain, is not looking out for ways for our growth and our healing. It's how do we avoid pain? So to your point about the inner knowing, that inner knowing is likely going to fly in the face of the reptilian brain. So this is why you and I need to sit in the driver's seat of our lives, not the reptilian brain, not autopilot, not default responses. So I love that you said that. BF says, love others, but no, you cannot love anything if you do not love yourself. That's so good. Desert Gem, hello. Thank you so much for joining. When it came from, then it will. Fabian, hello. I'm glad you're here. The Deadeye, hello. Can't love others if you don't love yourself. Fear not. Richard Johnson, I'm glad to see you. All right, y'all. I need to jump off. I am definitely, my eyes are closing. I need to go to sleep. Have a wonderful, wonderful night. I am going to try to do a show earlier tomorrow. I'm dropping my darling off at the airport at 8-ish. So I'll probably be able to do the show around 9. We will see. I will try to schedule it first thing in the morning once I know. I really want to get back to my morning schedule. I'm going to hopefully be kind of back on a morning schedule here in the next few days. But in the meantime, thank you for joining me late at night. And